Hello, hello. It is Justin Colletti of SonicScoop, and today we're talking about one of my favorite things to talk about, which is headphones. And with one of my favorite guys to talk about it, we have a guy named Rok here, who is the founder of Ollo Audio. And I've had a pair of Ollo Audio headphones, the ones I'm wearing right now, since about 2018. If you ever checked out my first 2 or 3 years of the podcast, I used these exclusively when I was interviewing people because I like the way they look, I like the way they feel, I like the way they sound. We'll talk about his headphones, but more generally, we're going to be talking about headphone design, what makes them sound the way they do, target curves on headphones, what it really means for headphones to be flat. And we'll talk about a whole bunch of popular headphones that are out there and how they compare to one another and how his newest headphones, the X1, fits into all of that. Rok, I'm so glad to have you here all the way from Slovenia. It's great to have you.
Well, thank you for hosting this. It's basically the first time I'm doing a live podcast, videocast thing. So let's see how this goes.
All right, sweet. We spent a little extra time setting up. Apologies if we have a little bit of imperfection in lip sync, but I'll see if I can correct it even further as we go along. But Rok, great to have you here. And I want to jump off by talking about what it means for headphones to be flat. I've talked about this in the podcast before because it turns out that when we play actually perfectly flat headphones next to our ears, they don't sound flat to people. So we need things called target curves to make sense of headphones. And I know that you guys really pride yourselves in trying to develop headphones that are as flat and useful for the end user as possible. Can you give us an overview for what are some of the challenges in making headphones that are actually useful for mixing? And what do you think are some of the best ways of overcoming those challenges?
Well, it starts with, at least in my point of view, we have these two different approaches to flat, or at least two philosophies about what's flat, and I believe you will agree with this. So we have the scientific part of what is flat, and that's something that researchers have been exploring for years, starting with the Fletcher and Manson curves, going all the way to the Harmon research and so-called Harmon target curve that's been used a lot lately. And on the other side, we have, final users, you guys, and you, Justin, as well. Mm-hmm. You have your own taste, your own opinion about what is flat. And I'm quite sure that even though you have like headphones or speakers that were very carefully and closely designed to sound in a specific way, you still kind of fiddle a little bit with, equalization in the low end or maybe in the mids. Maybe you bring the highs a little bit up to your taste. So then what is flat? We have the scientific way, and then we have users trying to fix those to their own taste. So starting off, we have these two different approaches that kind of overlap in what we do and many other companies as well.
Right. And there's so much subjectivity to the science of it because we all have differently shaped ears. And this is one of the things that can be so frustrating with headphones is that since we all have differently shaped ears, sound coming into our heads from the world out there is different for each of us. So if we put a set of speakers out into a room and play flat signal to it, I might have a bigger dB boost at 3K than you do in your ears. I may have a little bit of a dip at 7K in my hearing, and your dip might be at 8K in your hearing. So this is another kind of challenging aspect of, I think ultimately it's hard to say that there's one ideal set of headphones for everybody because of some of these differences. But I think you can find headphones that start as close to flat for you personally as possible. And I think it's possible for companies like you to try to make a pair of headphones that's going to have the biggest umbrella as possible, that'll suit as many people as possible. Now, I know that you've changed how your headphones sound over the past, 6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago now. I got my first pair of the S4Rs and the S4s, and you have these new models out that I've just been trying. I'll give my tasting notes on them soon, the X1. And you guys have done a lot of development. You've been through a few iterations of these. And to be honest, I like your newest headphones much better than your original headphones, which I liked to begin with. So can you give me a sense of how you change the sound of them over time, why, and what kind of feedback or processes you're going through to continue to kind of get closer and closer to the target curve that you want for these headphones?
Yeah, again, so we have two ways of approaching that. One would be just pure scientific way, doing research and lab tests and so on. And the other is trying to use human subject as much as possible. So in our case, we've designed early on the endorsement program, which is designed for professionals across the globe to join, and we give a little bit of a discount in exchange to be available for us and our R&D team to get as much feedback as possible out of real users, real case scenarios, real life situations, because that is the true fuel of the development. We let's call us just lab rats. We can do whatever we want in the lab, but if it doesn't really work in the real life, then we've created a product that nobody really wants. Right. So that's the whole point of connecting with the user base and gathering feedback, not in terms of, hey, these headphones are great, they sound fantastic, they are comfortable. Great, but in the lab, in the development stages, we can't really act on this kind of feedback. So That's the reason why we have this endorsement program, where we can actively, we kind of feel the rights to do that because we gave you a little bit of a discount. So we are going to take a little bit of your time away in exchange to get on the phone and ask you the little details about how you're using these headphones. Why do you think they're actually comfortable? Can you send us the pictures of your ear so we can measure them and stuff like that? So, we get behind the scenes, we do a lot of this feedback loop in terms of development. And through the years, from the original S4, that you've been one of the very early reviewers who said yes to a company from Slovenia that nobody ever heard about before. So that was you, Justin. Thank you for that. Back in 2017, I believe, 16 maybe even. So going from there to S4X and then S5X with the immersive audio, and now with the X1, which we are going to talk about a little bit later on. But the important thing is to understand that the feedback loop is extremely important when delivering pro audio products.
So can you give me some specific examples of what were things that you felt needed to be improved even further from the original iteration of these? So what are some examples of things that you've developed and put into the X1 that maybe weren't part of the brand earlier on?
Well, the very first edition of the S2, S3, and then S4, they were having like slightly small cups and small ear pads, which kind of works with a large proportion of people, but we have different shapes of ears and different sizes of penis, and because of that, we had to enlarge the ear pad to go really nicely around the ears, and that's one of the things that is over there in the X1 and was also in the S5X introduced. But the side effect of having a larger space is that the speaker driver now has to move a lot more air to achieve the same frequency response. So with headphones, it's a very tricky situation. When you enlarge something for like really tiny little bit, just a few millimeters, the volume gets up like 20%, 15%, and the speaker will have to do a lot more to achieve, for example, low frequency response.
Right. Yeah, that was one of the biggest things that I noticed between my older S4s and these X1s. I'll say a couple of things that I think you changed that makes them remarkably better is, number one, this headband on here on the X1 is just so much better than the original headband here on the S4s. Like this one, but one of the small complaints people would have is it could be a little bit noisy, like there could be a little bit of a ring, and that's totally gone on these. The other aspect of it is the ear cup depth, where these almost touch my outer ear ever so slightly, which is normal in a lot of headphones. You experience it. But I like this trend in a lot of my favorite headphone brands recently is for the deeper ear cups. And not only is it just a comfort thing, there is just something about the way the sound develops. For me, it's a slightly more speaker-like response when I have these deeper ear cups. There's just, it feels like it's not as glued to my ear. And I don't know, there's just something about how the sound stage is where things don't sound quite as upfront and in your face, and it becomes a slightly more relaxed feel where I feel like it goes, the perceived depth can go back even further because the front end of the speaker it's not right against my ear, giving me this sense of everything kind of being in your face. So that's what I mean by having a little bit more of a speaker-like response. One of the other things I think is really interesting that you guys are doing, that not everyone is doing, is this idea of headphone correction. So I want you to talk about this a little, because headphone correction has become very popular in recent years. Probably one of the best known brands for this is SonarWorks. There's other things like Can Opener. And the idea is that they will measure your headphones, or in most cases, an average of your type of headphones. And then they'll try to apply some type of target curve to that and get the sound of your headphones to conform more to that target curve. It doesn't actually make them literally flatter, but it makes them flatter in reference to some target curve that they've assumed is the right target curve. I think there's potential benefits here, but there's also potential problems and drawbacks to this approach. Can you tell me what you think of headphone correction and if there's better and worse ways to do it?
Oh, absolutely. So when I was researching this together with my team, we've learned that companies offering this universal or generic correction or calibration can achieve about 3 dB of tolerances in accordance to the whatever target curve they wanna do there, and that is due to the tolerances in materials and production cycles. It's just there. So in order for the headphones that you're buying at the 100 or 200 price tag, which are mass produced, of course, in order to have them kind of flatter or calibrated, they have to take 5 or 10 pairs and then average those out. And over time, they will never be able to get down to 2 dB or 1 dB tolerance in the frequency response. So it's still calibration. It does help, but it's not at the level that we can do. So with the X1, for example, well, first of all, we have a completely different way of assembling this, and the quality control is on a different level than anything mass-produced. But even further down the road, when we are calibrating these headphones, it's every single unit that is calibrated, which means that any tolerances in terms of ear pads, they have little stitches, and maybe one ear pad will have 5 stitches more than the other one, and because of that, the flow resistance will be slightly off in comparison. So we can catch all of that and then use the calibration software to correct those little nuances. And in our case, it's the approach of using wide Q factors. So we are not treating small resonances over there. We're just using wide EQ settings, just a few, like 3 or 4 bands only. And that's because of the musicality and because of what you mentioned, Justin, earlier, which is we all have different heads, and so-called head-related transfer functions are very different for each individual. And when it comes to measuring headphones, you cannot use a microphone, as you nicely explained in one of the videos a few months ago. So the ear simulator comes in play. So now the ear simulator is just, a device, an average response of many humans kind of put into a microphone in a way. And the response of that microphone will have resonances there as well, because it's mimicking a human ear. So now, if we place a headphone on top of that and we try to fix whatever resonance that this microphone, this ear simulator will actually catch, we could fix something that does not need fixing or is actually hurting your HRTFs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I want to repeat some of that back to you to see if I've got it. And I'm going to go back to some of the beginning things you said first, which is on general mass-produced headphones, it's even harder to get. First of all, speakers are one of the hardest things to get right in the audio world. It's much easier to get a neutral electrical circuit than it is to get any transducer right. So things like microphones, speakers, headphones are way harder than getting electric circuits to be flat.
Yeah.
So one of the problems here with headphones is that if a brand is mass producing them, there can be a variance as much as 3 dB. And that means that there's an average taken of this. you might say the average headphone has let's say, an extra 1.5 dB boost at 3K to make it sound even more present than its competition. Well, what's going to happen is if you take an average of that and do a correction that now is going to reduce that by 1.5 dB, what if you had one of the pairs that wasn't up by 1.5 dB, but was down by 1.5 dB, and now we're applying an additional cut of 1.5 dB for the average set of headphones. So you could have potentially headphone correction that's going in the opposite direction that you need it to go because it's based on an average. Now, based on the particular brand, it could be better or worse. The tolerances could be tighter, but that is a thing when you're trying to get inexpensive headphones mass-produced, that there's going to be these variances, and sometimes correcting to the average could actually take you in the wrong direction instead of making them better. Now, if I remember correctly, the difference you guys are doing, if I understood this correctly, you're not measuring the average of these pairs. First of all, you probably have tighter tolerances to begin with because these are slightly more expensive headphones, so they're hand-assembled, to my understanding, there in Europe. But secondly, you're actually measuring the pair that I got, and I have a unique curve of each one of these drivers that then factors into your correction software that is unique to this specific headphone to get me even closer to the target. Did I get that right? Is there anything I'm missing or anything that you want to add to that?
No, you're not missing anything. That is exactly correct. So yes, again, we measure every single pair manufactured over here. And once we have those measurements, we can apply some AI tools to calculate things and come to a calibration file, which is the XPS file. It's an open format, so you can open it with a text editor, and you can actually see the exact values of the correction, which is something that, to my knowledge, nobody else is offering. So that's great because you can take those values to any EQ that you have in your signal chain, right? From a FET filter, or ideally you would run that on your interface. Right, so if you have like a DSP-enabled interface, like Moto, RME, Apollo, and so on, you can have the headphones output and only the headphones output treated with the calibration for your unit while you are leaving the speakers calibration intact. So that is the ideal way of going about it.
Yeah, I don't know if other brands doing that. The closest is SonarWorks. I think they've had it on again, off again. I don't know if they have it right now or not, but they've had this thing where you can send them headphones, they'll measure the headphones for you, and then they'll make the correction curve. But people are often doing this to $300 pairs of headphones, and then they're spending, I don't know how much more in this, or they're, potentially adding 50% or more to the cost of the headphones. So you take these mass-produced headphones, and now you're making them more like a upscale headphone price to have that done, whereas yours, they're built as upscale headphones and then they have this from the factory. The other brand I know of that's kind of doing something like it is Slate. They have the VSX headphones where they will have a measurement of those headphones because the whole thing is that they're meant to be listened to through their Slate VSX software. And they're good headphones. Some of the problems there are, again, there are fairly okay quality headphone that has a lot of digital magic to turn them into useful headphones. And then there's a lot of focus on emulating lots of different rooms. You guys have a slightly different approach where we're just taking high-end headphones to begin with, trying to get them even more neutral with the optional EQ correction that you don't have to use. I, to be honest, have not used the correction at all with my X1s in evaluating them because I wanted to get a sense for how they sound raw, but I can correct them further. And then I think you do also have an optional ability, I think, with Waves to add on using this unique snapshot of the actual headphones that you've taken to do some room emulation, but it's nowhere near as mind-numbingly intense as the Slate VSX thing where there's a million different rooms and you have to pick your favorite. I think yours is a little bit more controlled. Can you tell us of that potential benefit of having the kind of speaker emulation correction that you've done with Waves? Why would someone want that? Why is it useful? And is it something the average person should look at for mixing?
Yeah, so we have two partnerships active. So one is with Waves Audio, which means that any Waves NX plugins will work with our calibration. There's just a copy paste and some code, and you will have the individual unit calibration inside a Waves NX plugin library. But we've actually striken a deal with the Real Phones from Sonic, and Real Phones is great software because they also enable calibration. So our file can be imported directly into Real Phones. That's great, but they also have room emulations inside their software as well. So you can have these different scenarios to test and check the mix translation. So it's very similar in a way to Steel & Slate, although we do focus on the calibration side and on the, just raw sound of the headphone a lot more than on the software side. And again, ours are, of course, individually calibrated, while Stevens are, I believe, calibrated in batches, which is, again, it comes from the manufacturing process. So you order 1,000 headphones, probably they're ordering overseas, and those 1,000 headphones get sampled, maybe 10 or 20 units, and then they get an average for that batch.
Right.
So it is a calibration, it's a good effort, and it's a really nice product in a way. But it's not what we are doing, although it might look like super similar. It's really not. We are doing calibration of every single unit, and that's a completely different process.
Yeah, that is something where my first instinct when I saw and then tried the slates, and they actually, the first time I saw them, I kind of turned my nose up a little bit and I thought, this can't possibly be good. And then I tried them, I thought, wow, for the price, these are surprisingly good. But my next thought was, if only I could get these in open back headphones that have better transient response to begin with, and that are just, can I get this put onto better headphones that are open back and that have improved transient response? And that's basically, I think, what Ollo is doing. And that's another thing I want to talk about here, which is transient response. In just a second, I want to give people my personal tasting notes. I'm going to do it in front of you, and you can be mad at me if I'm not singing their praises enough. We'll have to see what it is. It'll be my mystery tasting notes coming up. But I compare these to many different headphones, including these Sennheiser HD 650s. The HD 650s are less expensive. These X1s are more expensive. These 650s are mass-produced. These are kind of hand-built. But one of the big differences I find between really good dynamic headphones, which you have, and decent dynamic headphones like these 650s, is there's this difference in transient response where one of my complaints about the 600s and the 650s, they're great for the money, but I feel like I listen to a snare drum and the front end of it almost sounds compressed, like it's a little bit squished, like there isn't this speed and how fast the driver is able to move to give me accurate information about what the transients sound like, what the release of a compressor sounds like. There's almost this degree to which the tails of things can change. And this is very subtle because it's not a frequency response thing. And I think it's something you have to learn to hear. But I find that on headphones with faster, more accurate transient response, I can more confidently make decisions, particularly about things like compression and limiting, because I can really hear what's happening with the transient and what's happening with the release of dynamics processors. Do you have any thoughts about transient response, if that's something to care about and how that affects the overall impression of a pair of headphones?
Well, sure. So, for example, I believe, Justin, you know about guitar cabinets.
Sure.
And there are open cabinets and there are closed cabinets. So some will have a venting hole or some sort of a bass reflex or something like that integrated in there. And just for illustration purposes, right? So if you have a speaker that has to move, that is moving, the air inside a closed back or open back, it will have to do different amount of excursion, and also it will need different amount of power, and it will just behave differently. And it's similar with headphones. So we have the fully open headphones where the sound from the front cavity, so from in front of the speaker, can easily escape to the back cavity, so behind the speaker, and out into the world. And we have headphones that will have kind of like a closed situation where the front cavity is not directly connected with the back cavity, so behind the speaker. So in this regard, our headphones they are kind of like in a closed, front closed but open back design, where the air that is trapped in the ear pad in front of the speaker does not easily escape to the back of the speaker. And what that creates is better low frequency response extension and also a lot more consistent frequency response throughout the spectrum. But to answer directly your question on transients, so when you have a closed situation, and imagine these speakers in here are like super tiny. The membranes are like super thin. This is not like a speaker that you would touch with your bare hands. It will just break, right? So it's very, very sensitive. So when you put it in the environment where even little electrical stimuli will move it back and forth a little bit, you will already hear that a lot easier because it is in this kind of enclosed design. Whether if it would be in a fully open, it would need to move a lot more to achieve the same effect. And that's why many people, many of our users will say that transient response is great, as well as that you can actually hear like 1 dB gain reduction from a compressor and stuff like that. So it's partially due to the design of the acoustics of the X1.
Yeah, I think that's something I definitely recommend to people who are having trouble hearing compression. First of all, take my course, Compression Breakthroughs, where you'll learn to hear compression better because we go through a whole bunch of exercises. But just having monitors and headphones that allow you to hear those small differences better make a huge difference in the length of the learning curve. A couple other things I want to talk about around the headphones and what I thought was interesting. I'm going to give you now, if you don't mind, my tasting notes as far as frequency response, because that's, Rok, one of the biggest questions people ask is frequency response. What do they... But it's hard with headphones because you can't just show people raw frequency response data because it needs to be adjusted to some target curve. And in a little bit, I want to talk to you about what are the ideal target curves and how do you get there? We'll get super nerdy for the nerds who are listening for a long time. I don't think you use exactly the Harmon curve, and very few brands do, but how you come up with your own curve and why. But before we get there, I want to give my quick tasting notes on some of the other elements here. For anyone who wants to try these, Ollo have been longtime supporters of this channel. I've been rocking their headphones since the beginning. I love using these. They just look cool. I got to tell you, having put these on, I've been using so many other different brands in recent years because people keep on sending me headphones and I try to like go through a mix. Recently, I've been putting on the Austrian Audio ones. Sennheiser sent me some stuff and I was putting theirs on. And just putting these back on, I've got to tell you, one of the things about these headphones is whenever I wore these on the podcast, every single video, I would have at least one and sometimes 10 people asking, what are those headphones? They're just cool looking compared to the average headphones to have this wood grain and this vibe. I just like the overall aesthetic. They remind me a little bit of the Grado headphones that were made in New York and that were some of the first high-end headphones I experienced. There's just a cool look about them. And I got to tell you, as much as I enjoy the slim profile of my Austrian Audio headphones that I've been wearing lately for interviews, they just don't look nearly as interesting, and literally zero people have asked me, what are those headphones when I'm wearing the Austrian Audios? When I put the Ollos on, people ask, what are those headphones? So there is the kind of cool factor and look factor, and I like that about it. But beyond that, the actual sound of them. And if you want to try these for yourself, since Ollo have been supporters of this for a long time, they are giving right now a discount to SonicScoop folks. If you go to sonicscoop.com/Ollo, that's sonicscoop.com/Ollo, and you want to try these for yourself, there's a little discount code there that will basically get you some of the free room emulation software so you can make these more like the Slate stuff. So check that out over at sonicscoop.com/Ollo if you want to try them for yourself. But here are my overall thoughts. I want to compare them directly, if you don't mind, to these Neumann NDH30s, which I think are... These are the closest headphones, I think, in price, and the kinds of people who are looking at these NDH30s are probably the kinds of people who are looking at the Ollos. And I just want to give people, from my perspective, a sense for how they compare sound-wise. Before I even get to sound, I will say that fit and comfort I think 90% of people or more are going to find the Ollos more comfortable. I really like the headband design. It has this beautiful way of distributing the weight kind of across the whole crown of the head, whereas the Neumanns, it feels like a little bit more pressure in the center of my head. And even though the weight is similar, the Neumanns are ever so slightly less comfortable to wear. There's a slightly more like top of the head pinch going on, where these are a little bit more evenly placed over the head. But the biggest difference is going to be sound. And like I said, I don't think there's any one pair of headphones that's right for everybody. A lot of it comes down to your own personal biases. But I think that people who complain about the Neumanns being a little bit veiled, being a little bit too dark, a little bit too maybe mushy sounding, are going to substantially prefer the Ollos. So if you've tried the Neumanns and felt like they lacked detail, lacked clarity, were a little bit too mid-rangey, a little bit too dark, there's just this kind of openness and additional clarity and detail, I think, in the Ollos compared to the Neumanns. Don't get me wrong, I think the Neumanns are very useful, and if you tend to have your mixes be very dark and too mid-rangey, these can help steer you away from having mixes that are too mid-rangey by making you want to suck out some more low mids and add some more brightness. But if you already have well-balanced mixes and you feel like you're just not getting the detail you want to have the Neumanns, I think that's something where the Ollos really excel, is that there's a little bit more clarity and detail. Do you think this is me being crazy, or do you think there's anything to those tasting notes? Do you have any insights into how those models might perform differently from one another?
No, from what I've experienced with the Neumann, which is, by the way, an incredible company with incredible tradition. But the model, the NDH30, I've tested them about 2 months or 3 months ago, something like that, together with the MM500 and 100 from Audeze as well. So I've just got a bunch of this to test them out. And in my that would be like my personal opinion. The NDH30 are on the warm side of headphones, so they are perfectly fine for mixing, for mastering, anything like that. But if we are comparing them to the X1, to what we are doing and we are trying to do over here, they would tend to sound a little bit warmer and a little bit mushy, as you mentioned before. For sure, in comparison with the X1. So I would agree with what you've said over there.
Good. Yeah, I would say that
maybe it's worth mentioning that they are built from aluminum, right? So they have quite a really good quality build.
Yeah, it is a different material. They're similar to yours, being on the heavier side of dynamic headphones. But because of the band design, I feel like that weight is easier to bear with the Ollos than with these. Yeah, they are made of good quality materials. There is something a little bit, I think, sexier about the Ollos. I really like the wood grain. So some of this comes down to your vibe. Maybe if you're like a modern DJ aesthetic, you're really going to love the look and vibe of the Neumanns. Whereas if you're a little bit more rootsy and organic of a person, the wood tone is cooler. I also like the ear pad material. This is, again, not sound stuff, but there's just this soft, supple quality to the ear pad material, this kind of imitation leather and this wood grain, which I really like. But I think you're right in all the things that you've said, and it kind of echoes what I've said about the differences. I would only hesitate to use the word warm because some people think the opposite thing when they hear warm from what I mean. For me, warm means generally darker, more lower mid-range, mushier, but some people say warm and they actually mean brighter and more present. It's one of those words where like it doesn't have an actual scientific meaning, and every once in a while people say, oh, I like that sound, it's warmer. Like, what are you talking about, warmer? It's brighter. So it's a tricky word. So I'm going to go with the darker and more mid-rangey. The other one I compare them to directly that makes a lot of sense to compare to is the Sennheiser HD650s. And again, this is a big difference where when I compare the Neumanns and the Sennheisers back to back, the Neumanns have so much better transient response. And there's this mushiness in the attack of things on the Sennheisers that I don't experience in the Neumanns. And then we go even further in that clarity direction with the Ollos. One last thing I would say here is that I was surprised by just how much output the Ollos have. These have to be some of the loudest headphones I have in my studio. Like, I had to really crank the dial on the Neumanns and the Sennheisers to get, I feel like, the same level of output that I'm getting out of the Ollos, which makes me feel like the Ollos are going to be really friendly to lower powered interfaces, headphone amps, mobile devices in a way that some other headphones might need more juice and could benefit even more from going up to a nicer preamp. What are your thoughts on headphone preamps gain? Do you think that these are louder maybe than some of the averages and might need less juice? Do you think they benefit from a nicer preamp? Do you think people need to worry about preamps? What are your thoughts around these ideas of headphone gain, impedance sensitivity, and coupling them with nicer preamps if necessary?
Well, of course, there's going to be a difference in sound, and of course, there's going to be a difference in transients and stuff like that when you power them properly with a nice amplifier. But truth be told, these are made for professional audio users, and that does not really mean always just people with crazy budgets and crazy gear available. These days, audio professionals are working with a laptop from anywhere they are. Also, there's a massive amount of students in audio engineering, not just audio engineering, just music in general, songwriting, multimedia, video creators, YouTubers, and so on. And audio is a part of every creative project these days. So having a tool that you can rely on is very important. That said, of course, it's great to have a nice amplifier, but it's also great to just have a headphone that you can take with you, that it's flat, that it will translate whatever you're doing, and that you can plug into whatever device you're using at the moment, from a laptop to, tablets, or you have a nice SSL desk over there and you plug it over directly into the desk. It doesn't really matter. So the headphone design, or when we were making decisions on that, were based on the feedback, again, from our users and real case scenarios. So we have to serve them first, and secondly, think about what would be the ideal combination of the amplifier and the headphones themselves. But on a side note, you mentioned the sensitivity a little bit there. Mm-hmm. So again, based on the design, the acoustical principles that we are using over here, it means that they are more sensitive than other headphones, because when you push in 1 volt, for example, of course the speaker, the membrane will move, but because it is in a front cavity closed, open back, completely open situation, the amount of the SPL that it can create in here, in the ear pad, is a lot greater in comparison to other headphones and maybe very similar speaker driver unit with 30 ohm impedance, but it will just be quieter because of the acoustical design. So that would be basically what I can say about this without going into really too much details.
There are going to be some nerds here, me among them, who want to hear even more details, so don't be afraid. We might go further depending on what kinds of questions we get from the audience. You've already been generous enough to give us more than a half an hour of your time, and I want to turn it over soon to questions from the audience. But before I do, there's a couple more things I want to touch on. The last quick set of comparisons I want to talk about is I also compare these back to back with what have been my primary listening headphones lately, which are my Audeze MM500 headphones. And I've got to say, the sound of the Ollos was much closer to the Audeze MM500s than it was to the Sennheisers or the Neumanns. I felt like they had a slightly closer profile, and I didn't have a pair of the the Audeze LCDs to compare them to, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were also very close to the sound of the LCDs. There were some differences, and I'll touch on those for a second, but do you think that there's any accuracy there, that these are maybe a little closer in sound to the Audezes than they are to the Neumanns and Sennheisers?
Well, if we were to look just the frequency response on its own, I would say it's fairly similar to the Audeze LCD-X, a little bit more than the MM500. Mm-hmm, yeah. Which, again, I've tested just a few months ago, and I do have the measurements. I'm not sure if we already published that comparison on the webpage yet, but we do have a report, which is from our lab. The reasoning for doing that is because there are so many different target curves, because there are so many different ear simulators. It just makes absolutely no sense to compare, two different measurements from two different operators, even if it's the same gear, it's still going to be slightly off. So we've decided years ago to invest quite a lot in the lab, so that we can do our own measurements, well, for ourselves, of course, but also share it in a very objective way into the world, so that when you see a comparison of frequency response between our products and whatever there is out there, for example, the MM500, those are on the same reference, on even playground, if you want to call it that way. So that's important. So for me personally, the MM are great headphones, are really nicely done. I think that Audeze did a great job in designing these things. In comparison to the previous series of the LCD-X, for example, they were kind of like chunky and bulky, and they had this, if you try to move it, they would squeak. There was like a little screw in there that would unscrew often. Stuff like that that were really nicely addressed with the MM series.
Yeah, I've been happy with them. I would say that one of the differences here is that for me, I felt like maybe there was even a tiny bit more clarity still in the Ollos compared to the MMs, but I'm not sure if I can totally say that, because there was this additional bit in the mid-range in the Ollos that wasn't there in the MM500. So the Ollos were nowhere near as mid-rangey as the Neumanns, but they reminded me a little bit of, there's this characteristic thing going on kind of in the center mid-range that I heard in the Ollos that reminded me a little bit of Austrian audio, where it's just a little bit of a different voicing, where sometimes some headphones like these MM500s and others can sound almost a little bit scooped out in the center mids, where I felt like there was this presentation that reminded me a tiny bit of Austrian audio, where there's something in the center mid-range that was brought forward relative to the MM500s. I don't know how to describe it other than there's almost like this little bit of additional center mid-range quack or smack that has a different type of feel, not the kind of low mid girth and fatness of the Neumanns, but a little bit of kind of center definition, which gives us detail without brightness. Does that make any sense at all based on your understanding what the frequency response on these is like?
Yeah, what you're describing is mostly the area between 850 and 900 hertz up to about 3.5, 4K. That's where these headphones, the X1, are really good at. But it's not just that. We also need to understand we're not talking about planar technology and dynamic technology, which are two very, very different, in a concept. So yeah, in terms of frequency response, they are extremely similar, to be quite frank. But in terms of the soundstage, which you've touched on before.
Yes.
So what is soundstage? Trying to get this idea in our heads, right? So we have a speaker in front of us playing sound, and it will reflect from the room that you're in, and that will create a lot larger radiation of sound, right? So it's not just one tiny little bit. It's a lot larger as a starting point. So the same thing goes with the planar headphones, which they all use like supermassive speakers. And of course, when that membrane moves, it moves a lot more air, and it's also moving the air that is not directly in front of your concha. It's also moving the air around your ear, maybe even behind the ear if it's big enough. And all those reflections are also happening inside the headphones as well. And some manufacturers are producing those artificially, or they want to have them more to artificially boost the soundstage, or at least the feeling of a soundstage.
Yeah.
Right, so all of that plays a massive role. So, for example, the full line of Audeze's will, or should at least, give you a little bit more of a soundstage in comparison to our products, to the X1, for example.
One of the things I noticed that's potentially pleasant, and this comes down again to personal taste. I don't think there's a right and wrong with how you are experiencing the soundstage, because one thing that is different about the Ollos compared to the Audeze's is that ever so slightly, the width was kind of brought in a little bit in the Ollos. Where I felt like things that were panned super hard were almost like 90 degrees on either side of my head on the Audeze's. In the Ollos, they just tilted slightly forward a little bit more. which is probably closer to how things sound on speakers in a way. Is there some type of tilt going on with the driver as well that accomplishes this? Because I know that unlike your past designs where they were interchangeable, these old S4s, I could turn them around the other way and they should sound the same. With the Ollo X1s, I believe you've changed something about how the driver sits in here where there is now a true front and back. So can you tell us why that would be the case? Why is that something you changed from the first designs? And does that have an impact on things like our perception of the stereo field?
Well, of course it does. So we've moved the speaker slightly forward in the chassis, and it's also at an angle, which of course improves the soundstage overall. So the sound is kind of moved a little bit more forward, as you mentioned, and also a little bit more wider in comparison to our previous products. So yeah, we changed that with the S5X series already that were designed specifically for Dolby Atmos mixing, by the way.
Yeah, very cool. Now, what are the considerations for a headphone that is made for Dolby Atmos mixing? Because I know that prior to the X1s, you had, here's more of our studio model, here's more of our Atmos mixing model, and now it seems like you found more of a one happy medium with the X1 that's kind of meant to be able to serve both those purposes. Why did you originally have two different designs, and why did you decide to break it down to just one?
So we started with the S4 as a stereo mixing tool, and then we are listening to the feedback from our users, and they were asking for the Dolby version, or basically, what would be the ideal frequency response for a headphone for mixing immersive audio. And we did quite extensive research on that. And we've learned that, Dolby, for example, or Sony 360, they have their own target curves for theaters, and they do certification of their studios as well. But there is no target curve officially from them that would say that would be the frequency response for the headphone, for the ideal headphone experience. So that was intriguing, because what happens is that after talking to Dolby for quite extensive times, they were approaching down mixing in terms of how we are virtualizing the sound in a binaural situation. So they are basically taking all the speakers from the real world, trying to put them down into only two speakers on your head. And that is basically what down mixing is. It's using just binaural technology to, trick your brains into believing that sound is coming from a certain direction. So the question that popped out was, okay, so we are now calibrating these studios. Dolby will come into your studio, they will calibrate it and certify it. It's within 1 dB tolerance of their target curve. Great. The moment you try to use any headphones, the frequency response is nowhere near that target curve that they're using in the room scenario. So what we did, we went into a Dolby certified studio. We used the full mannequin. We took it with us, so the full camera system. We put it in front of the speakers that were certified in a certified room. We captured the frequency response with that ear simulator, and then we took it back to the lab. We put our headphones on that same simulator, and we compared the frequency responses on the same simulator between what it heard in a certified room and between what it hears when we put our headphones on. And then we did acoustic designs and stuff that goes into the development of headphones to match the response of our headphones on that ear simulator as closely as possible to what Dolby wants in a certified studio. So that was the S5X. And now the X1 is basically bridging the gap between both of those into one model, primarily with a target curve that is adjusted for both, but also with the calibration. So the software that we touched on earlier, the real phones, will have all three different target curves. So our flat target curve, which will be just a linear line over there, because that's what we use as a reference. And then there will be a spatial target curve, which is slightly boosting the high end which is, again, in order to work with the target curves from Dolby. And we also have the Harmon version, which is basically just tilting the frequencies a little bit and boosting the low end. So we have all three different target curves available through the software when you're using the X1 headphones.
Brilliant. So it sounds like part of the reason you don't need two models anymore is because of this digital assistance you can do with the correction. So you can go even more in the immersive direction without having to have a whole separate set of devices to be able to service. And that's something I want to talk about in a second, which is the servicing. Because one of the questions that has come in is Benj writes in to ask, any idea on how long the pads last, how easily they're changed? Same for the headband, etc. Is the hassle to keep them replaced and refreshed often? I think this is something that's been important to you guys because there's a lot of brands where you buy their set of headphones, they sound really good and work really well, but then 3 or 4 years out, it's almost like you can't use them anymore because the things are flaking off, one of the driver dies, and not all of them are either economical or easy to do replacement on. So what are your thoughts on availability of replacement parts? How often are people going to have to do things like change out headbands and ear pads, which is probably the first part to go on most headphones? Any thoughts on there around the idea of serviceability and expected wear?
Yeah, quite simple. So all the spare parts for all our models are available in our spare part store, which means you can buy a headband, a strap, ear pads, cable, whatever button notes, and even the back plates if you want to. You can exchange your speakers yourself because these headphones were designed to be serviceable at home using home tools, again, by listening to our final users when they're on.
While we're waiting for Rok to get back, he may have to disconnect and reconnect. So one of the things I thought was interesting here was the desire to put the Harmon curve in there as one of the options in their correction software. Because one of the few complaints I could think about that might come from people just from a sound frequency response perspective is that the Ollos maybe have a little bit less low end than the Harmon target curve, and then the average of some of the other headphones out here. So for someone who wants a lot of a good amount of detail and clarity, these are an excellent choice. But I can imagine some users saying, but I wish they had that extra low end lift that's common in Harmon curve. And that's something that I think is in there in the correction software where you could go more towards the Harmon curve. I'd imagine you can also create customized curves. So that would be my only thought. Like, what could I do to have these replace my Audeze's as being my primary listening set? I think they're so close, but I think I would want to hear just slightly more ramped up low end for my personal taste. Now, there's a lot of people who feel exactly the opposite and are going to be really attracted to the idea that there is a little bit of low frequency, a little bit less of a low frequency boost in these Ollos compared to some others. But I think what Rok was getting into right before we started to lose him there is that, oh, there he is coming back. Hey, Rok, we have you back.
Are we?
Yes, indeed. I was, don't worry, I was killing time with the audience for you, talking about some of my thoughts and tasting notes. And one of the things I brought up, we'll get back into the point you were starting to make before we lost you, was I really like the idea that you added Harmon curve as one of the options in here, because I would say that your headphones have slightly less of a low frequency tilt up than is in the Harmon curve. And I feel like you can put that back in if someone was missing that. They say, I love everything about the Ollos, but I wish it had that slightly more exaggerated low end of the Harmon curve. You can put that back into these headphones. So if you feel like that's the one thing that's missing, you like everything about them, but they just don't have that extra low lift that you want, that's something that you can do. And I imagine why you put the Harmon curve in there as one of the correction options.
Yeah, of course, because we have different tastes when we have different ears and so on. That there is a reason for the Harmon research to exist, and there's a reason why we have debates about it. There's a reason why many audio engineers will tend to like the so-called diffuse field target curve rather than the Harmon version of it. And also, there is a debate that, headphones, they need to sound perfect out of the box. But hey, reasonably, saying this, there's basically no speakers that will sound perfectly flat in whatever room you're putting them in. So eventually, using equalization is just a tool to do the little fixes, the little nuances, and getting things like really ready. And in terms of headphones, they have to move with you to whatever project you're doing, wherever you are. And the side benefit of headphones is that they will work from whatever device you're using. And with the calibration, yes, great. You can, just use whatever EQ you have available, ideally directly from your interface. If you're running RME, Motu, or stuff like that, you will have EQ capabilities inside the interface itself, and you can have that on the headphone output alone, not affecting anything else, and you don't have to worry about bypassing, the plugin that you would usually use. So having these options, I think, is like the most important part, because what else is achieving translation if it's not that trying to test your mix in different situations with different frequency responses and tilts and rooms and all of this, and having headphones with software that can enable that, that's like you're 90% there.
Yeah, you're saying something that's making me think about what's happened in speaker technology and making me wonder if it will happen in the future in headphone technology. So I know you love feedback from people who actually use these things. So I'm going to throw this out there as an idea and tell me what you think of the feasibility of this. I know there's some obstacles, but we'll get to that in a second. Speakers these days, a lot of people don't necessarily realize that almost all of the speakers these days, maybe it's a slight exaggeration, but most of the speakers these days that people love the sound of have DSP inside of them to assist with the box design. So it's good to have a great box design for speakers, and you want to get the speakers as close to perfect and phase coherent as possible. If you have multiple drivers, maybe there's 2 or 3 drivers in your set of monitors, and you want to have the phase relationship between all of them as good as possible. There's a lot you can do with designing a good box and putting good drivers in there, but you're never going to get it really perfect unless you actually put some DSP into the speaker itself that corrects for some of these potential phase issues, and maybe does some additional tuning. And that is like the norm now in studio monitors, where it's probably harder to find an all analog set of studio monitors than one with DSP. And you are one of the companies at the forefront of this idea of, well, what happens when you make as good of headphones as you can with this technology, and then add an additional layer of we're measuring each of the headphones specifically for you, and then allowing you to take it even further with EQ correction. Could there be a future where these are built in to the headphone itself? Is that feasible? There was one brand that did a little bit of something like that. It was Blue. The Mixify headphones that I had a preamp built in. You could charge it with a USB cable, and then you could turn on that preamp, and there was a slight EQ tilt. I, to be honest, really never used that feature with the Blues because the kinds of correction technology that we're talking about now weren't available then, and there wasn't the ability to switch between different profiles. But could you imagine a pair of Ollos in the future where I wouldn't have to run a piece of software inside my computer system-wide on the app, would actually be built into the headphone? There's some annoyances there because now I have to charge my headphones if I want to use them with that feature, which can be potentially annoying, but it potentially gets rid of some possible issues, or it's integrated into the headphones. Do you think that's something we'll see in the future, or do you think it's better overall to have that run inside of the computer?
Well, at least for now, I can say that we are not developing anything in this regard as of yet. Although this does come up, again and again and again, up to the moment when I say, all right, so we want to have super durability, so you can throw them around, and in your case and in your, you can tour with this. Then you can have multiple artists coming into your studio, and they need to survive everything that happens there. You want to have full serviceability with home tools, but at the same time they cannot get too heavy. But now we want to add DSP in there. We want to add another battery in there. So obviously we're going to get on the super heavy side, or we will have to sacrifice something else in order to achieve that. So the question comes in, are you an audio engineer that truly needs just, great sound, or are you an audio engineer that needs something that's like super simple, super easy to plug in? What is it that you want? And obviously there is no such thing as one product, one size fits everybody. That's just not gonna happen. So our approach has been and still is, traditional cable being plugged into a very fairly decent audio interface, which, by the way, audio engineers will invest thousands and thousands into audio interfaces to do the DSP in there. So why would we put anything, inside a headphone where maybe we could use like $10-15 of own cost to create that in there, and you would pay another $300 for that.
Right.
So yes, it's a game of balancing things between what is possible, what is an idea, what could actually work, but then what are we gonna lose because of that? So at the moment, I'm not sure that it's the right path, but what I am sure is that there is gonna be a headphone company that will do that. But it's not going to be made from stainless steel, aluminum, and wood. It's just going to be plastic that is super lightweight. Right. And the DSP processing in there is going to be okay, but it's definitely not going to reach the level of whatever audio interface you're running.
Yeah, and this is a good tie-in to the topic that you were talking about right before we cut off, which is serviceability and repairability, because one of the big differences that with this paradigm I'm talking about would take this away from is your headphones are almost like an old Ford or Chevy from the 1960s where someone could put it in their garage, roll it out of the garage, jack it up and work on their engine themselves, and they could fix everything in their car without being like an aerospace genius. But a modern, if you get like some modern Subaru or modern cars from anywhere, like you can almost not fix anything on the car yourself. There's so much that's computerized. There's so much where you'd have to go to a specialized shop. And I think your headphones are a little bit more like the vintage car where it's like you take a screwdriver and part comes out, part goes in, because they're hand assembled rather than machine assembled. So they're hand repairable. So if you could go back to this idea of why you think serviceability is important and how you try to approach that. You were cut off right when you were saying that people on tour aren't going to send back their entire pair of headphones. And take us from there. What were your next thoughts on that idea?
I don't really remember anymore, but what I can say is that, of course, the serviceability is extremely important. When people are on tour, and it does happen, these days a lot of musicians are on tour, are traveling artists basically. Even if you're a mixing engineer, maybe you're not an artist, but mixing engineers do travel a lot as well, because work, is all over the place these days. And having a pair of headphones as a reference is extremely important, because you get to a new studio, even though it's, I don't know, the last time I believe it was Tokyo Spears from the Walk of the Earth band, talking about the importance of a reference gear, because they are traveling a lot. And whenever he's mixing their songs, he's in a guest room, in a guest mixing environment. And the only thing that he has over there are the headphones. So that is like the most important tool for him. So if anything breaks, it needs to be like super easy to service. So we just send, maybe with express shipping, next day delivery up to 10 a.m. It's possible with DHL basically anywhere in the world, one day delivery. And we send, like new speakers or a new cable or extra earpads or new bolts or whatever you need. And you put that together yourself while you're touring. That is a massive advantage of our headphones and our design across any other. And in terms of, you mentioned, sustainability. I believe that as a company, but also as a society, in a way, I think we need to start looking into products and designing products that are meant to last. Well, not forever, but at least have a nice lifespan, so that we don't do things like some companies do, which is they kind of integrate in the development of the product its end of life.
Planned
as well.
obsolescence, they call it, yeah?
Planned obsolescence. I was looking for that. Thank you very much.
Yep.
And it does happen. It really is there. And there's many companies that, you have something for 2 years and there's no more support. You can't get any updates. You can't get any spare parts. And for me, I mean, that's not acceptable. So, we really want to avoid that going further as a society again. I believe so. So designing a product like the headphones can be one way with plastic and tools that are completely unrepairable, or it can be with a screwdriver, nuts and bolts, and put together into something that works anywhere, anytime, and you can repair it. Like you mentioned, a Chevy or a Fender guitar from the 63, you can still run it and it works and it's beautiful. And what's the problem there?
Yeah, great. So we've been going for over an hour. I want to get to a few more audience questions before I let you go. I really appreciate all of your time and expertise on this stuff. It was really great to hear from you. Couple of comments coming in. Elmore writes in to say, jonesing for the X1s I ordered. Woohoo. Gotta say, a big reason I went with Ollo is you can see, or Ollo, I should say. One of the reasons I went with Ollo is you can see that Rok is beyond passionate about his products, and that's huge in this world. Yeah, I've seen that you've been doing, you guys should check out, if you haven't, the Ollo YouTube page as well. Rok has been putting out regular videos. You've had some that really kind of demystify or speak to particular technical points around headphones, but also you did this cool listening series. You have some really popular videos there where you give your first impression listening to a bunch of records through the Ollo headphones. I think that was a fun series. So definitely go over there and spend some additional time with Rok if you've enjoyed it here. And if you do want to order the X1s yourself, Rok was generous enough to say, hey, anyone checking this out through SonicScoop, you can get them at a slight discount where you basically get some of that speaker emulation software for free. Check it out over at sonicscoop.com/Ollo. That's sonicscoop.com/Ollo. And that special link will get you an additional discount and add-on for the headphones. All right, some more comments here. Benj says, I currently have the HD 800s and the Slate VSX. These Ollos sound like they would replace those and fill that gap. Yeah, I think he's talking about he has a nice pair of open back Sennheisers, and he has a pair of closed back Slates that do the correction and room and speaker emulation. And it is true that this would potentially replace both of those, where you just have a nice open back pair of headphones that sound good by itself that also do the room and speaker emulation. So I think it's a great niche. And like I said, when I first saw the Slate stuff, I said, I can't wait until some company does this with already good headphones. And I think that's what Ollo is doing. All right, let's go a little further here. Elmore says, I had a pair of Focal headphones and the bands on both sides cracked. He says they're useless now. Oh man, that's terrible to hear. I really like the sound of the high-end Focal Clears. They are some of the other best dynamic driver open back headphones out there.
They're amazing.
But yes. However, they are about 2 or 3 times more expensive than either the Neumanns or the Ollos. And apparently they don't necessarily have that kind of maybe serviceability and durability that the Ollos potentially have. But I really like them. Did you have additional comments or thoughts on those?
No, actually, the Focal Clear, they use a different driver. It was designed within the Focal, of course. It's their proprietary tech over there. I believe they call it the M-shaped driver or something like that. So it has a very specific shape, and the mixture for the membrane is very specific, which does bring really good sound on the clears, not on the lower tier products, but on the clears it does work really well. The problem of that speaker, not to say anything bad about Focal, is just that if you push them really, really loud, because it's a fully open design, so they have a massive soundstage, really, really nice, really comfortable. But because it's a fully open baffle in a way, so when the speaker has to go really loud, it starts to go out of sync, out of phase, and it cracks. So you will get audible distortion there at around 9500 dB SPL, or if you're just using strong gig samples and stuff like that. So that would be the only downside. Otherwise, truth be told, the Focal Clear are personally one of the best headphones I've heard alongside the X1. So I love mine, but I also love the Focal Clear. Yeah.
I agree, and they
like really close.
And theirs, I think, like I said, are 2 to 3 times more expensive. I think they're in that $1,500 to $1,800 price point.
Yeah.
And I think one of the other issues, I've recently really got into the planar magnetic technology. Yours use dynamic drivers, and the Focals use a very interesting proprietary dynamic driver. But I believe that there is also this potential issue with planar magnetic drivers. If you're driving them really hard with an underpowered amp, I've also heard of potential issues with the drivers in them, and with them maybe losing low frequency response from being pushed way too hard. And that's another possible issue there. So I also don't know if the planar magnetics are going to be easy to service yourself. I don't know if you're going to swap out a planar magnetic driver yourself in the same way that you would with a dynamic driver. That is yet to be discovered from me. I don't know yet. But yeah, things all worth considering. Let's see if there's any other corrections here. Ben says, where does the correction run? Is it native, DSP? The correction is just native. You would run it as a plugin in your DAW, or is there a system-wide app for this software that you guys run?
Yeah, both.
Gotcha.
Both are available.
And can you tell us the name of it one more time?
So it's Real Phones, the Sonic Real Phones software. It was adapted for us for the USC. We call it USC as unit-specific calibration. And again, I need to mention that one more time. The calibration file is imported into that software. It can also be imported into Waves and X, but it can also be read as a human being. You can read numbers, which means you can read the frequency bands, you can read the Q factors, and you can dial those into whatever EQ you're using on your signal chain for the headphones, ideally directly in a DSP-enabled interface for the headphones out only, which means that anything you're playing in your DAW, anything you're listening directly from the control from the recording room, anything you're playing from Spotify, anything will be calibrated in your headphones, which is something that none of other companies or competitors are offering. So
wonderful. So possibly the easiest way to do it is as a system-wide app, so everything gets heard through that same curve on your headphones. And that's very important for referencing. You don't want to listen without a correction curve on Spotify for all your references, and then you go and listen through a correction curve on your mix. That's a problem. It makes your referencing useless. Another way, however, potentially of doing this, one of the problems is if you're on a situation where you're going back and forth between speakers and headphones, and you're not just using headphones, that could be an issue where you now have to potentially mute down or turn off or bypass the system-wide app when you go over to your speakers. So one workaround potential here that I could imagine is having a special headphone bus in your DAW that would route out to your headphone amp. So this is only if you have something somewhat sophisticated like an Apollo, or even like some of the basic Focusrite stuff that has its own mixer. You could potentially take a particular output and route that output only to headphones and not to speakers. So you could have a bus, like a mix audition bus called, say, your headphone bus. It goes out to outputs 3 and 4, and it has the correction on it. And outputs 3 and 4 are what feed your headphone feed. And there are interfaces that will do this. So now your main monitors, which are on outputs 1 and 2, don't have it on there, and your headphone output, which is fed off of 3 and 4, does have it. So I think that would be one good way of doing it. The only problem, again, is with referencing. If you're referencing stuff off Spotify or off YouTube, how do you get it through? So you'd have to find some way, maybe using a program like Loopback, to be able to route your audio from your Spotify into your DAW and listen to it on that bus through an open channel. That's possible, but it becomes more and more complex, but it is doable. You had some additional thoughts there, Rok?
No, basically the easiest workflow, as you mentioned, either a standalone app, which could sometimes not be ideal for you because you want to just use the direct link, because it is basically a virtual card. You need to understand that. So a standalone app within whatever OS system, it is a virtual card. So you need to select that as well in your DAW. So there could be some issues there. You need to fiddle a little bit with the sampling rates and stuff like that. So again, the best possible scenario is if you have an interface like the Apollo, like the RME Fireface, and Motu as well, and many others. They will have internal mixing capabilities, and you would just use the EQ either as a plugin if it's enabled, like in Apollo, for example, or in Mission Control from Neumann. You would just have the plugin there, or just use the values that you get in the calibration file and transfer them manually to the EQ strip on the headphones strip only. Which is what these cards are capable of doing. You can have a different mix altogether for the headphones alone. So that is I think the only truly correct way of using calibration with headphones or speakers. Yeah.
That sounds like the best option, way better than what I threw out there. Only issue is not every single interface is going to be capable of that necessarily, because it's not in the DAW, it's in the headphone path in mixer software for a specific
for the interface itself. Yeah. So for example, the Neumann M48, great. Apollo with the what's it called, console something, I don't know.
Yeah, the UAD name. Console.
Yeah, you can have it there, so you can use FabFilter there or whatever you want. Then the RME, they have the total mix, I believe it's called. Again, you have like a full mix for the headphones alone. And Motu will also have something, another mix console. So I believe that
a lot of
any Focusrite for sure has something as well. So I'm not sure what kind of interface you would need, interface you would need to buy to not have these capabilities.
You're right, more and more
I think
have
from
them
200 or 300 euros or dollars upwards, I think they will have this capability there.
You're absolutely right. I'm stuck in the past, and pretty much every interface has this optionally these days. You're right. All right. Let me see if I can find any additional questions here. Mr. Elmore is wondering who ordered the X1s. He says, any idea when batch 19 will ship? Because you make these guys in handmade batches. Sometimes there's spots in between availability. It sounds like he ordered a pair recently and is wondering when they're going to be shipping out. Do you know when your next batches of X1s are coming to the public?
So honestly, I don't. So what we do is we produce X amount of headphones every week, and that is about for us. So
Gotcha.
the whole process of quality control in, and all the speakers get tested, matched, and so on throughout the week. Comes Friday, and on Friday we do the quality control out, where the whole batch is measured, taped and packed and so on. So everything is in batches, and as the demand for X1 is like extreme, like really extreme, we haven't experienced anything like that in a decade. We cannot really produce or even spike the production fast enough to catch the demand for these headphones. So currently, I believe it's a month of a delay. So if you order them right now, they're going to be shipped a month from now. So batch 19, I'm not sure which one it was, probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So I'm guessing it is scheduled for shipment next week, something like that.
All right.
That would be my guess. But if you really need an exact date, write to our support and we will reply to you shortly.
Sounds good. All right. Another question here from Benj, who says, my Sennheisers are $1,200. I wonder if it would be much of a step down to the Ollos. Here, I just want to say that although price is a potential indicator of quality, there is this aspect where, like, once you get above a certain price, and what that is for the unit, it depends. But once you get past a certain price, I don't think you necessarily get better, but get different. And I think at the price point you are in headphones, this $600 and up range, at least for dynamic drivers, I don't think you really get better, but get different. I think if you're spending $200 or $300 in open back dynamic driver headphones, probably spending more can get you headphones that perform objectively better in some way. But I think once you're in this bracket of $500 and $600 on open back headphones, it's less about being objectively better in some measurable way and more about being different and more suited to your tastes. Do you have thoughts on that? Do you think that there's a point of diminishing returns where extra dollars will get you additional objectively raw quality when it comes to headphones, and where might that price differential be?
Well, it depends, but honestly, just like anything else, when you start, when you get to the diminishing return kind of law, it's quite obvious that materials can get better, but are also extremely difficult to manufacture. And there's a nice link, something you need to understand. When something is very difficult to manufacture, it also makes it extremely difficult to manufacture it again with exactly the same specs. So that's extremely difficult. So when it comes to headphones or whatever, and you start using extreme materials, you can, but you're just gonna pay like mega price to get that like a little bit better characteristics, which many times is just a number that really, with closed eyes, you would never know it's there.
This is another important point to bring up. I know that for a lot of brands, headphones are one of their highest margin items that they offer. Like there are these companies that sell a lot of different things. Headphones usually have higher margin than do speakers. And sometimes when you buy a $1,500 pair of headphones or $1,200 pair of headphones, some of the time, it's almost like the market will bear this price, so that's what we charge, rather than it is directly correlated to how much more these headphones cost us to make than another thing that's further down our line that just has a smaller margin. So I think that's a big thing to be aware of, is that there is a degree of margin inflation on higher end products where they necessarily sell fewer of them, so the margin has to be higher on them. So not every dollar that you spend on the most expensive items always goes into quality. One quick example I'll give is these Audeze MM500s are great, and they are $1,500 to $1,800, I think. The next step up that sounds really close to them from Audeze are $4,000, the LCD 4s and now 5s that are out. And I would say that for the additional $3,000-ish, $2,500 to $3,000-ish dollars, they sound maybe 2% better, 3% better, maybe 5% better, I don't know. And these probably sound, to me, 10% better than the $400 headphones. These are $1,500. The $400 version of these, I want to say these sound 10% better. And then the $4,000 versions maybe sound 5% better to me. That's a very subjective statement. Who knows what 10% or 5% better means? But those are essentially the feeling I get of difference. So the higher up you go, the more the diminishing returns are. And I think specifically for dynamic driver headphones, really when you're spending in this 600-ish range around the Neumanns and the Ollos, I think that's where you're hitting diminishing returns falling off very, very fast, very, very hard. I could not say that the $1,500 Vocal Clears sound $1,000 better than the Ollos. Like I don't think anyone would say that listening to them both. You'd listen to both and say, ooh, these are both choices I could work with. Do I like something about the character of the vocals that I want to spend $1,000 more on them because they suit me better? But I don't think you're going to say, listen to them and say they sound $1,000 better. You're going to say, ooh, they sound different in this way. And based on my tastes, I have to make the decision of whether or not that difference is worth $1,000. Does any of that make sense to you?
Yeah, it is exactly like that. Although it's interesting to be on this side of the table,
right,
with the manufacturers side, where we know the economics of stuff,
sure.
And the economics of channels, sales channels. So we are a direct-to-consumer company, which means we can afford to sell these at 600. We still make a little bit of profit. We're not greedy, right? We still make a little bit of profit.
You got to make some profit, or else you can't make them anymore.
Of course. And we keep the lights on, and we keep developing this great products, and we are keeping it at a reasonable price. While if we were to be, deploying the same product through a traditional distribution, deals in US or UK or wherever, we would not be able to survive at this price point.
No, the
Because
price would practically double.
Close to that, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I said
Close to
practically,
that.
but yeah, there is a significant thing that happens when, the more people involved need to get their cut and all that. So it is very cool that it's one of the benefits of the model that you guys have is the quality to price ratio is very nice.
Yeah.
And again, I just like the way they feel and I like the way they look, even if I didn't like the way they sounded, but they also sound very good. I think you guys should try them out for yourself. Do you have any type of return policy for people who aren't sure if these are going to be the right headphones for them? Can they try them out in the comfort of their own home at all and figure that out?
Yeah, of course, we have 90 days trial period, as well as 180 days for people that are buying through the link that you've mentioned before, which is sonicscoop.com/Ollo, if I got that right.
Yes. Yeah, do it up. So I didn't even know that. So you have like a half of a year to try them out and see if you like them more than your other headphones.
Yeah.
And you get that additional calibration software with that slight discount there. So go over to sonicscoop.com/Ollo. That's OLLO if you want to try them out for yourself. Try them out in your house. See if you like the sound of them. And Rok will probably never hear about it if you don't like them and send them back, so you won't hurt his feelings. So just go and try them out and find out for yourself whether they make sense compared to what you already have. Some people, like with any headphones, some people are going to love them and some people are going to have different tastes. And I always recommend use videos like this to narrow down your potential choices of headphones and then try 2 or 3 things and you return the ones that you don't like, because headphones are a deeply personal choice. And hopefully this is at least narrowed down whether these should be in the top running for you, the top 2 or 3 headphones you want to try, and then just really try them and try them back to back on material you know and love. Level match them to the best of your ability. And don't only go for the sound quality of the headphones, but also what direction they steer you in the mix. And are they steering you in a direction that helps you get better results? And I think for those of us creating, that's one of the most important things. For those of you pleasure listening, I think they're very pleasurable headphones to listen to while also being useful, very much so for studio people. So Rok, thank you so much for being here. I think we have gone through the stuff we need to go through. Any final words of wisdom or thoughts or things you want people to know before we let you go for the day?
Not really, but I will finish with this. We are a very, very small company in comparison to anything that you've had there on the table.
Sure.
And what that means is that you can give us a call and we will answer. And if you want to talk to me, you can talk to me and I will answer any and all of your questions.
Very cool. All right. So reach out to Rok, get his cell phone number. You can text him at 3 a.m. I don't know if he'll respond at 3 a.m, but at least you have a line to him. And that is one of the things that I've heard from people who really like your headphones, is that they've had great experience with customer support, with serviceability, with stuff like that. And they're headphones that are made not only to last, but to be able to be something that you can refresh if and when necessary, because they're just so user serviceable with a basic screwdriver you have at home. All right, Rok. Great to have you here again. Thanks so much for being here on the SonicScoop channel. Big thanks to Ollo for being long-time believers in and supporters of the channel. Check out that link over at sonicscoop.com/Ollo. That's sonicscoop.com/Ollo if you want to try them out in the comfort of your own home with a bit of an extra discount and a ridiculously long trial period on them. Thanks again for hanging out with me. It's been Justin Colletti of SonicScoop with Rok of Ollo. Thanks for hanging out with us. See you next time.
Bye. Thanks.